All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this year's first pollution prevention webinar. We are really excited about this year's pollution prevention webinar series, and we are still planning out all of our future webinars that we're going to be having. I know that the second one in the series is going to have more of an ag structure behind it, and it'll be in March. There'll be more to come from that. So be watching your emails from me for all the upcoming webinars in that series. This webinar today is being put on by the Tennessee Pollution Prevention Program in collaboration with PDEC's Division of Solid Waste Management, Rockwood Sustainable Solutions, and Arrowhead Ag Solutions. My name is Caleb Powell, and I'm an environmental scientist for the Office of Sustainable Practices at PDEC, and I'll be hosting the webinar today for our wonderful speakers. Everyone is muted upon entry to reduce the amount of background noise, but if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to ask those in the chat box, and I will work on getting those answered. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm currently sending a chat to everyone. You should see that over on your right-hand side. Let's see. And it just says this is a chat box, send all your questions and comments here. And we really do hope that you will be sending questions or comments or anything that you have to add. I think that's an added benefit of a live webinar, is being able to ask our speakers those questions or give some comments as you see fit. So just to give an overview of what is going to be covered today, this talk will discuss the various regulatory pathways for approving the land application of solid waste in the state of Tennessee for agronomic and soil amendment benefits. The focus will be on permitting specific application sites, authorizing beneficial use projects, and obtaining non-waste determinations for free release of certain materials. The webinar will also highlight a land application case study of gypsum recycling. We'll hear from Rockwood Sustainable Solutions about their new partnership with Arrowhead Ag Solutions and how they have become Tennessee's first drywall recycling facility. Their innovative recycling approach not only keeps scrap drywall out of landfills, but also extends the landfill's life and reduces odor caused by wet gypsum. So without further ado, our first speaker is going to be Nick Lytle, Solid Waste Permits Manager for TDEC's Division of Solid Waste Management. I'm going to pass over the presenting capabilities to you, Nick, and you have the floor.
Thanks, Caleb. One second. Okay, there we are. I know how to operate this. So my talk today is about the state's perspective of land application from a solid waste side of the house and the regulatory pathways that you may go about getting authorization to do that. Again, my name is Nick Lytle. I'm the Solid Waste Permits Manager for the state of Tennessee. I do spend most of my time on disposal issues, C&D disposal, Class 1 municipal solid waste disposal, but we do have, I would call it, this boutique program for the authorization of land application of solid waste. And I put down there and recovered materials. We'll get into the nuances of what is a solid waste and what is a recovered materials, and the state's regulatory oversight of those two different types of material.
Hey, Nick, I totally forgot. I was going to ask the group to do a Mentimeter question. And so I'm going to, sorry about that. Everyone, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask that everyone will go to Mentimeter, and let me show you that. I'm just going to ask a pre and post question just to see. Basically, we're trying to gain real-time knowledge if our webinar audience learned anything in addition for our grant requirements that we get for these type of metrics. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nick. I just totally spaced that this is a new thing that we're doing. So let's see. Okay. So if everyone can just go either on your phone or on your computer. It might be easier on your phone so you can see the screen in real time. Just menti.com, and then you use this top code right here, 3196-7320. And so basically, I want you to take each of these four subjects, and then from 1 to 5, tell how knowledgeable you feel. And Nick, I know that you're going to skew things because you're a bit, I don't know.
How am I going to give a presentation about something and say I'm not an expert?
No, you're right. So if everyone will just go in there, use that code up top, 3196-7320, and then we are going to see how knowledgeable everyone feels with each of these topics. We'll give about 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll get started. So for anybody that just joined us, what we're doing right now is just doing a sort of pre-question to see how knowledgeable you feel about the subjects that are going to be talked about today. Give about 1 more minute and then we'll get started. All right, so feels pretty good. Yeah, I guess it shows that people aren't completely knowledgeable about it, and so there's opportunity for us to learn today. So we will be taking another Minty, very similar, just to see after this webinar how knowledgeable you feel in these certain subjects. So from here, I'm going to pass it back over to you, Nick. Appreciate that. Sorry for the small interruption.
Okay. Okay, land application of solid waste. Why do we want to have land application of solid waste? For a lot of reasons. It's the state's initiative to reduce the amount of waste entering landfills. It has been for a very long time, since the Solid Waste Act of 1991 was passed. There has been various state regulations, state statutes that dictates our goals and timelines for reducing the amount of waste going into landfills. A landfill should be the very last place for a material. It's the place of last resort. Unfortunately, we know that in the South, historically, we've had a lot of land, we've had a lot of airspace in our landfills, and thus disposal is very cheap, which leads us to this next thing, money. Municipalities, corporations, in general, are going to choose the path for disposal and the path for waste management that is most advantageous from a money standpoint. Historically, that has been cheap disposal. If you read the paper lately, you'll know that disposal is getting pretty tricky in certain places of the state. There is a lot of dialogue about limited capacity in certain areas. So we want to reduce the amount to conserve what landfill space we have permitted out there. But in many cases, we are going to do what is cheapest, and in many cases, land application waste is sometimes a cheaper option. And I put a link there to the state solid waste plan. This land application initiative pacifies many of the 8 objectives: increased diversion of organics, enhanced processing and the enhancement of the end market, so that's another end market, support of new diversion technology, and ensuring sufficient disposal by not utilizing our landfill airspace with organics and other materials that have other applications. So why do we regulate this? So it's a tricky area for the Division of Solid Waste Management. Myself and the staff that I work with are generally trained in the field of solid waste management. They have backgrounds in engineering, geology, soil science, etc. And yet we've got this program which is kind of agricultural a lot of times in nature. There are some land applications that are not agricultural, but those are the minority cases out there. So we do have a regulatory, the Division of Solid Waste Management needs to regulate this, but I'll say it's not necessarily our specialty, and it is a learning curve for us, and myself and the staff here, we have an ongoing initiative to better educate ourselves and better normalize land application regulations and oversight across the state. Land application does have negative effects. It does have groundwater impacts, or can have groundwater impacts. It can have surface water impacts from applying to heavily or runoff towards creeks or water sources. It can accumulate various items in the soil that can have a negative impact upon the soil, a negative impact upon the crops. It can have vectors, and it can have nuisance complaints. And we've seen all of these, honestly, with our land application program, maybe minus the groundwater impacts, but we've seen all of the other ones at one point in time since this program has entered its modern phase, which has occurred since probably around 2004 or so. So, beneficial use of solid waste regulations. We in the department here, or in the division, see three distinct pathways towards approval. The easiest one for us is the land application of food waste. And it's easy for us because we actually have regulations for that. They are very specifically regulated under the permit by rule authorization under Rule 411.01.13. That is a set of regulations and rules promulgated in the early 2000s that very strictly define what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable for the land application of food waste. That makes life very easy. We have a rule book. We have a pathway forward. We're not making things up. We're just applying the law. That makes it very easy for us. The other pathways are for the land application of other solid waste that are not food waste. We have a little nuance of our regulations, for example, that says that DAF skimmings are not a food waste residual, even if they come from a food processing plant. So whenever we encounter those, for example, even though they might come from food processing, we have to apply the beneficial use determination for that. And those are subject to Rule 411.01.021B3, Roman numeral 11, or 21 rather. And that's a much looser framework. That basically gives the commissioner of TDEC and the director broad discretion to do a beneficial use determination to say if something is harmful or beneficial with no real foundation. It's pretty much just prove it to us. And because of that, we have written a policy for that has been in place for a very long time, and that will be one of my future slides. The third way is to just basically do a non-waste determination. So you notice throughout this talk, I'm talking about the beneficial use of solid waste. I work in the Division of Solid Waste Management. Well, I only have authority over things that are not a solid waste. So if something is not a solid waste, then you basically don't have to apply by any state solid waste regulations. You may have water regulations, you may have fertilizer exemptions or something from the Department of Agriculture, but from the Division of Solid Waste perspective, you're no longer a solid waste. And the delineation between what is a solid waste and what is not a solid waste isn't always clear cut. Oftentimes we just take a conservative attitude on that for the sake of protecting human health and the environment, call it a solid waste when maybe somebody could argue something isn't. Examples, and I'll only touch on this once, and this will go into Lincoln Young's world, is like gypsum. So gypsum can come from drywall, gypsum can come from coal combustion plants. Gypsum is part of that coal combustion residual federal universe. So if a coal combustion unit produces gypsum from desulfurization, and that goes into a landfill or then goes to the ground, then that is a waste. It's met its first purpose, then it's going to its second purpose, and it's no longer useful, then it's a waste. Now, there is a plant in Tennessee where the gypsum comes out of the coal combustion unit, and it goes straight to manufacture. It never touches the ground. It goes straight onto conveyor belts, goes straight into trucks, and then is manufactured in wallboard. That is a product. It was never a waste. It was used for one purpose, then used for another purpose. It's a recovered material. It's very much akin to recycling. In that case, there is no solid waste oversight. There is no potential for harm. It's just a product that, just like a recycled bottle. So to go into a little bit more detail on the food waste, and I'll preface this by this, because we don't really have necessarily a distinct regulatory playbook for the other non-food waste land application, we do apply many of the regulatory tenets of food waste to other waste as well, because they make sense. Land application of food waste must do one of two things. It must have a legitimate use as a soil amendment, meaning it modifies the physical properties of the soil in a manner to benefit the agricultural operation, such as adding clean sawdust to low permeability soils in order to increase permeability, porosity, to hold water better. Or it must modify the chemical properties of the soil in a manner to benefit agricultural operations. And that would be like lime to modify the pH of the soil. So that is one. It either has to be legitimate as a soil amendment, or the next thing it could do is it could have a agronomical benefit, meaning that it is suitable as a commercial fertilizer. And in order to do this, you must provide information on phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, other nutrients. So it must make the soil better, or it must act as a fertilizer. And you have to prove that your application rate is at a rate does not exceed the nutrient demands of the target crops. That's where it gets a little tricky for us, because we do have a few staff on file that know about these things, but generally it's a little bit of a learning curve. So when we get these applications in, we usually will pitch these to other field offices, to staff members who have a background in approving this sort of stuff, rather than just our common inspectors and engineers. Potential problems with land application of food waste is the presence of heavy metals, potential for long-term sidicity impacts. I learned that term yesterday. I actually lifted that phrase from a different PowerPoint, but that's its ability to transport water, I believe. Long-term salinity impacts, salts in the soil, just flat overloaded, change of the pH over time, lack of nutrient or soil amendment qualities. So I'll pause there and talk about what we've seen out there. Because we have a waste stream that needs to go somewhere, and we have a large amount of farmland and just land in general in Tennessee, we have seen cases where the land application of a solid waste is done out of convenience, or is being done because the landowner is being paid to do it, rather than that landowner is getting it because they know it makes the crops better. So, and it's hard to prove that, but we're being clued into a few cases of that lately, where somebody's got a waste stream to get rid of, the landowner is getting a decent paycheck for taking it, and they're just taking it, not growing anything, and not worrying about its impacts. So that's something we definitely are trying to regulate a little bit more heavily. Land application, there's various methods that this is can be done. Flip over to other PowerPoints to reference some of these. I'm not going to change slides, just references and definitions. So this can be done through incorporation. That's where it's initially applied on the surface and then mixed and folded over or tilled into the soil. It can be done through injection. Denali Waste Services does this all throughout the state, and that's where they use their proprietary Terrigator, and they inject it subsurface into the soil. We do like this method for liquid waste. It prevents runoff and prevents a lot of the odors and vector problems that we see in land application. You have just basic land spreading, and that would be like maybe like a manure spreader. Ridge and furrow, and that's done with liquid waste where it's discharging the furrows of like a row crop and allowed to dissipate. Spray irrigation, We used to have stricter regulations about spray irrigations, about staying farther away from creeks and springs and other things, because it can get away from you. It's for liquid waste, it does work. It is somewhat common, but it does have a downside. And then you have basically bulk discharge, where just the liquid waste is driven across, and it is the hardest to control. And that's where you're just dumping your water across the land. There are buffer requirements that we apply pretty much to all land application of solid waste, regular waste or food waste. We apply our standard landfill waste boundary and buffers, such as you cannot be within 500 feet of any residence or dwelling, within 100 feet of any surface water, springs, or otherwise, 200 foot of a public roadway, and then 1,000 feet of a public well water supply. So land application of other solid waste, as I mentioned earlier, if it's not a food waste and doesn't need that permit by rule authorization, you need to basically petition to the commissioner, petition to the division, that this beneficial use does not cause harm to the environment and has a beneficial purpose. There is a guidance document on that you can have at this link, and I'll go over at very high level what that entails. You have to do basically 9 basic things. You have to identify the solid waste generator. You have to characterize the solid waste stream. You have to have a well-defined beneficial use project. You must have adequate detail. You must identify location, property owners that are involved. You must have landowner's signature to show that you have authorization to land apply at these locations. You have to have record keeping of where you're placing it and what quantities you're placing it. A description of how the waste will be handled and stored, a description of how the release of solid waste to the environment will be prevented, and a schedule of the proposed application, major steps to completion, and any other information that we need. And in practice, we do just usually apply a lot of the food waste land application guidelines to this. So for a non-waste determination, going back to what I said earlier, so this is very much an open discussion. What you're doing with a non-waste determination, these are best applied for. We see this most common if you're asking for a free release. So like maybe you have a paper ash that you want to use as a soil amendment, and you don't have a location that you want to use it for. You just want to sell it or give it away and free release and not have the record of land application. Happens quite often. With the other 2 methodologies of approval, you must state where you're placing it. It's bound to a piece of land. If you're doing any project that is being sold to the public, given away to the public, and a free release, you basically are going to have to do a non-waste determination. You have to prove to the state and petition to the state that this is not a solid waste, that even though it could be disposed of, this is not being disposed of, and it is a fertilizer or has some of the other benefits we talked about earlier. A common approach people have taken is to petition to the Department of Ag for a fertilizer license, where they do an analysis of the material to show that it is a fertilizer. In practice, once we get a letter from the Department of Ag that says something is a fertilizer, we usually step back and say, okay, this is agricultural, this is not TDEC, and we stay out of it. And in most cases, because people do want that kind of permit shield, we will write you an acknowledgement letter of our decision just to memorialize the record in case something comes up to show that we did a non-waste determination on this material. So with that, that's the end of my basic discussion. If you have any questions about land application or anything solid waste in the state of Tennessee, landfills, disposal, recycling, otherwise, this is my contact information. That is my direct line there. You're welcome to ask me or petition for any of these answers. And with that, I believe that's the end of my portion.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Let's see. I'm not seeing any questions right now, but if you think of any questions for Nick and want to get those answered right now, on the webinar, make sure to send those in the chat box. There is a drop-down box that either says all participants or all panelists, or you can make sure that you choose one of the ones that say host in it, so that I will get that question, and I can make sure to ask it to Nick or any of our other speakers. So if you think of any questions you might have, send those over, and we'll get those asked and hopefully answered. But I appreciate that, Nick. Next, we are going to take the presenter capabilities, and we are going to move on over to our case study. And I'm going to introduce Lincoln Young. Lincoln is, oh, actually, we just had a question come in. Right before we pass it over to Lincoln, I think, Nick, there's a question that came over to you, if you don't mind answering it before we move on. It says, can you speak to the status of land application of biosolids, let's see, from anaerobic digestion?
Yeah, so two different pathways there. So if the land application of biosolids are run through a composter, through a TDEC, Division of Solid Waste Compost, Tier 3 facility, where they're producing a compost, like Southeastern Compost in Smyrna is an example of one of those. It's away from the POTW, and they're doing compost of that biosolid. Then at which point that compost is a finished compost, it is a product. It is completely slated for free release. Outside of a complaint or some other issue, we do not get involved with that. The other pathway is regulated entirely through the Division of Water Resources. That's where Anastasia Sharp, Bob Odette, that group there does a permit authorization that designates that compost that's gone through that digestion as EQ biosolid suitable for agricultural purposes. And then that never touches the Division of Solid Waste. That stays Division of Water Resources from the POTW, gets digested, gets the designation, and then slated for free release once it meets the specification for that, and goes through all that appropriate testing, which is somewhat rigorous. Or it goes to one of our composters, gets the same basic testing, laboratory panel, 3 days at 160, et cetera, and then gets a designation of a product. Does that answer the question?
I think it answered the question for me. Oh, yeah, and she just said, yes, it does. Great question. Yeah, and keep those coming. If you have any more questions, shoot those over to me in the chat box, and we can ask them to Nick at the end of our other presentations. So next, I'm going to introduce Lincoln Young. Lincoln is the president of Rockwood Sustainable Solutions, and they're just starting. So I'm going to let Lincoln talk about Rockwood Sustainable Solutions as a whole, and then talk about this case study that we are highlighting as Rockwood has become the first Tennessee drywall recycler. And so, Lincoln, I'm going to pass it on over to you. Yep, there we go.
All right, sounds great. Can you hear me, Caleb?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you all for allowing me to be on the call today. And Nick, thank you for the introduction there. I know now that we've taken this quiz, I'm a little nervous to make sure that everybody learns something. So give Nick some fives when you jump back on there to let us all know you're experts in land application. So I wanted to just kind of touch base with what we did on drywall. And kind of thought that I would start with, the problem, some of the basis of what we were looking at, some of our process, and then we'll turn it over to Doug Giles and kind of introduce him a little bit as well. So just to get started, Rockwood Sustainable Solutions is a company in Lebanon, Tennessee, and you kind of see here on the screen what we do. We run roll-off dumpsters. We have Tommy carts, which are a small 1.5 cubic yard carts that we take into multi-level build-outs and demolition and stuff. Well, we're bringing these materials to our facility from construction, post-industrial type waste, things of that nature. From there, Really, we're going to take those materials. If they're sorted, we won't have to clean them up. But if not, we're going to sort those materials to where we start pulling out from a commingled waste stream of construction. We'll pull out wood, concrete, drywall, cardboard, plastic, glass, tires. I mean, basically what we're looking at is we're looking to try to move everything that we can out of a construction dumpster or from an industry that we're working with. We're trying to move everything that we can off of going to landfill and onto a recycled product. So today I want to talk more about drywall than anything. Just backing up a little bit of that, the majority of our business is wood recycling right now, where we're handling several thousand tons a year of that material, and we're turning that material into a mulch mainly. And then we were going to a downdraft gasifier. That gasifier currently is kind of looking at changing ownership and management. So over the last few months, we haven't been moving wood there, but we are moving wood to mulch and animal bedding and different types of applications there. So I'll talk a little bit about wood, but mainly want to focus on drywall, because I think where wood comes into place is the conversation of biochar, right? So besides getting all over the point, let's first look at drywall. So Caleb, if you want to move that next slide. So really with drywall, the reason we started looking at it was we got several calls from, really a lot of it stemmed from either contractors that we were working with who were trying to get over a 60% recycling rate out of their lead. They were trying to go for a lead platinum or lead gold. In lead platinum, you're ideally trying to hit about a 90% recycling rate of your construction materials. And quite honestly, that is impossible unless you have a drywall recycling plan. So we started looking at that. And then the other side of it is we had some folks from Metro, as they were starting to look through some of their solid waste goals and zero waste initiatives, kind of pinpointed that, hey, there's a big drywall problem in Middle Tennessee because there's really not a solution for it. So just a couple of facts. I mean, these were things pulled off the internet, but there's an estimated 15 million tons of drywall that's landfilled annually. One of the problems with drywall or gypsum as it goes to the landfill is when you mix gypsum with moisture and get that material wet, especially as it's in a landfill environment, it can release hydrogen sulfate gas, which is typically what gives you that rotten egg smell. I'm not a landfill expert, so if you got a landfill question, that would go to Nick or Jeremy on the call, but it's what's causing a lot of those odor problems in the landfill, which is that hydrogen sulfate gas or the sulfur that's in this gypsum. And then, just kind of quickly, as a breakdown of drywall, pretty much drywall is a fairly simple material. You've got a paper backing typically on most of your residential grade drywall. You have a paper backing on the front and back of it. On some of your industrial drywall, you have a fiberglass backing, which we'll talk about fiberglass insulation or drywall here in a minute. But that's going to be interlaced into the drywall, as well as typically you're going to have a fiberglass type liner on the front and back of that board. Normally where that's going is it's going into a fire rating wall or it's going into some sort of industrial application. So all that said, mainly drywall is going to be 80% gypsum, 20% paper. So just a few sources that we would bring drywall out of is construction, demolition, manufacturing, and local waste companies. So stay on this for just a second. So as we started looking at the drywall process, what we did was we first started and we did some and I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story just because I think it can relate to other waste streams and be able to be converted to kind of clear a path as you're looking at different land application. But when we first got started with drywall, really what we were doing was we were working with a gentleman named Forbes Walker, Dr. Forbes Walker, who's the soil scientist for the University of Tennessee Ag Extension. And we were working with them on biochar. And I'll talk a little bit about biochar in a second, but I know that's not really the purpose of this call. But what we were trying to do was trying to find homes and applications for this material. In the state of Tennessee, when you're going to land apply something, unless you own the farm that you're going to put this material on, if you're actually trying to sell this product as a viable end product, you have to have Ag Extension's blessing. You know, in a lot of ways, if a farmer's going to use or someone who's growing crops is going to use a different type of material in their soil, typically what they're going to do is they're going to want to know if the Ag Extension Office agrees to this practice or doesn't agree to this practice. Is it something that they've used? If it's new, what are the rates at which they would apply it on the land? So besides the regulatory side, then there's kind of this other side of how do we develop this market around this material? Again, if you own 500 acres of land and you're land applying, you know, distiller's mash or something of that nature, you know, that's your stuff and that's your land, and, you know, as long as it's approved through regulatory, then, you know, no big deal. But on our side, I don't own land, so we're looking at how do we bring this to market. So very similar with the biochar discussion and the gypsum discussion was going to the Ag Extension to do some research with them that we helped pay for, and then also did some stuff where, you know, they were a great resource to look and say, all right, these are the applications that we can use this product in, and then these are the rates that we can use this product in. So we were working with them on that, and one of our large customers came to us and said, hey, we want to try to recycle this gypsum. And you know, the nice thing about our facilities, at the time we did not have a drywall recycling equipment per se, but we've got shredders, we've got screens, we've got grinders, and so we're able to play with those pieces of equipment and try some things. So we did a couple of things. First thing we did was we did a very small kind of bench top study where we took some gypsum, we took some biochar, we sent that to the lab at UT. They did some growing experiments with it, with just biochar. They've done some stuff with biochar and gypsum. They did stuff with just gypsum, and they were really looking at the water retention holding capacities of hydrangeas. And then from there, we also started looking at what are some other applications. So just a little sidebar, we had this lady that I had met at a recycling conference, and she was using a mycelium or a mushroom, and what she was wanting to do is see how we could grow mycelium or mushrooms through this gypsum compound. And so we did another test where we took about 5 tons of material, we ground it down, we used some mycelium and put this in a building where we would allow it to grow for around 21 days, and we let that material grow through the gypsum. And what we found at the end of it was that the mycelium really did a really good job of kind of encapsulating that gypsum in almost to the form where it turned it into kind of a block of material. Similar to what you would see in kind of a high density foam insulation, kind of had that foamy type feel of this material. So what we did with that material was we pulled it out, sent some samples off to various different drywall suppliers, Certainteed, there's another massive one, I just went blank, but either way, Owens Corning. There we go. So we sent this off to them, and we said, hey, look at this and see if this is a material that you could take and make a viable end product for it. Could you turn this into a roofing insulation? Could you turn it into a type of wall board? Could you, what are some end uses for this? So that was that. We never went land application there, but really, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is kind of a willingness. I'd say if I'm talking to anyone in the room that's looking at, okay, what could we do here? First thing would be willingness to try everything. Whether that's mushrooms or this or that, to try to come up with an option for these materials. The short story on the mushrooms is it's paused. Like, it takes 21 days to grow through. That's a long time. I can grind gypsum at a rate of about 40 tons a hour through a grinder. To think about that and then thinking about a 21-day grow period, it's paused right now because we're kind of looking and say, is this a scalable model? And the fact is that it could be, but it has to be a very, very valid end product for that to be scalable. So what we did from there is we moved into land application. And we said, all right, we know that gypsum is used in agriculture. We know that it's used in, a lot of times in peanuts, a lot of times in vineyards, but it's a product that can, it will bring about sometimes a better soil health, things of that nature. So what we've done is, and I'm going to let it pass a little bit here to Doug, so I'm going to stop on exactly what we've done there. But basically what we're doing as Rockwood is we've found a home for this material. So because we found a home for this material, and a very viable home with a lot of material, is on my side, what I'm looking to do is I'm looking at bringing in this drywall, sorting it, and then processing it. So really where this has started happening, and I'm probably still in one of Doug's lines, I'm sorry, Doug, but where this all came about was, for us, a lot of these coal-fired power plants that are producing synthetic gypsum are now not producing this gypsum because they're not using coal. So what that allowed us to do is it's allowed us to take a recycled drywall coming off of construction projects and use that into agriculture, because it created a demand that wasn't there several years ago. So I say that to say that's also another piece of land application is there demand for the product? And Nick alluded to this, but if someone is taking a land application material and just putting it on their property over and over and over again with really no purpose, it kind of starts running into the question of, like, are we actually land applying it or are we landfilling it? And so I think for us, really what caused us to go ahead and move forward in the drywall was that the end market got very robust. And and a lot of that was because of the reduction in the availability of synthetic gypsum. So really from Rockwood's perspective, what we're doing is we are aggregating the product. So we are going to bring this material in, we're going to sort it, and we're going to do an initial process. So here's what we're sorting. We're sorting trash out of it. We're sorting, paper and plastic and all these odd things that everyone loves to throw into a dumpster. The other thing that we're going to sort is, right now we have no home for fiberglass-backed drywall. We'll take it because we're not going to be able to be very competitive if we have to have people pre-sort things. So we'll do the sorting. But right now, if you've got a drywall that is full of that fiberglass, it actually causes issues in land application with things like earthworms and microorganisms and things of that nature, to where we try to pull that product out. And luckily, that's fairly easy to do, because it's fairly easy to be able to tell based on the type of paper on that. So then the next step we do is then we move our product to Arrowhead Ag. And so just I don't know, Caleb, you're going to introduce Doug, but I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction because most of you on this call are like, hold on just a minute, like Lincoln, Doug, they know each other, they work together. There's a lot of folks on the call that know the two of us. So, you know, cat out of the bag here. We are, Doug and I work together at Rockwood. What we saw in the Arrowhead Ag was that we wanted to start a new entity for the sole purpose of producing land application products or for the sole purpose of utilizing products in agriculture. The reason we rebranded it was two reasons. One, we wanted to put a little distance between the sustainable waste recycling company and the ag company that is looking at taking in things for reuse, right? So, so there you go. We wanted to, you know, it's not a secret, but Doug and I have worked together. The great thing about Doug is he's been in the agricultural world for years. So where we see this going, and I'm about to end because I know I'm taking a little bit of time. Where we see this going is two things. Do I have any more slides, Caleb, or is that it? There you go. All right. So where we see this going for us is not only with drywall, but I mentioned biochar. And what biochar is biochar is the biochar is what you make when you take a wood material or a woody biomass, you gasify it, or you're incinerating it without giving it oxygen. I can go through all the details, but what you're doing is you are trying to make this material burn. It's not burning, so you're pulling off a syngas. You are taking that syngas and either making power or steam or heat, and then the byproduct of that is a very solid state of carbon with the wood that you are using to make that. Biochar is becoming a very hot item because it is a known carbon sequestration material. It is also a known material that is used in agriculture. It's used in all kinds of different things to pull nutrients to the root of the soil. So you're adding carbon where it goes, which is in the soil. Because it's a carbon sequestration material, it's pulling some of the greenhouse gases from the environment to the soil where it belongs. If any of y'all are in the ag world, you know there's a huge movement going on right now with regenerative agriculture. Tennessee is the top leading no-till regenerative agricultural state in the country and probably across a lot of the world. And so what we would love to see, and what we've been working with both UT and some other entities on, is they believe that gypsum mixed with some biochar or even by itself could actually help reduce greenhouse gases. And so for us, this is something that we're really excited about, because if we can take this gypsum out of the waste stream, we can process it, make it into a pure material, and then put that back into the agriculture where it's then also reducing your carbon and your greenhouse gases. I now have the ability to go to my customers and say, look at what we're doing with your material. Not only are we recycling it, not only are we creating a product with it, but we're also reducing your greenhouse gas and your carbon footprint, which, as we all know, is becoming very, very, very important. So that's where I see the future going here. I'll turn it over to Doug and let him move forward with what his presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Lincoln. You did a really good job at introducing Doug, but as Lincoln mentioned, Doug is the president of Arrowhead Ag Solutions, and I will let him just get started with what they've got going on at Arrowhead.
Thank you, Caleb. Thank you all for having me. Caleb, I would like to request the next time that you pair Lincoln and I together that I get to go first. So, because he loves to tell the whole story and then leaves me the crumbs sometimes, but got plenty to talk about. And I want to start off just kind of give you a 30,000-foot view of what gypsum is. So, you know, obviously when we branded this company, Arrowhead Ag Solutions, that meant that agriculture is going to be our front and center. I've seen it posted and said a million times that through all of the inventions of mankind, we owe it all to 6 inches of topsoil and because it rains. So we want, soil health is going to be our top priority. We're not going to move anything to a customer that's going to compromise that. So what is gypsum? Gypsum is calcium sulfate. So what are some of the uses for that? We've talked about land application in farming, and there's also a big market in concrete. So when they blend concrete together, they put gypsum in the mix, and that prevents flashing in concrete. So if you've ever worked concrete that's set up really quickly, it's not a whole lot of fun, and so they add that gypsum in there to slow that process so you've got time to get it worked in. Obviously, our first market is the ag market for a couple of reasons. Number one, it doesn't have to be precisely perfect every single time you send out a load. There is some variance in there. Concrete, it needs to be pretty precise, and we are very much in the R&D of our process to get that mixture right. The percent of paper, percent purity in every load is not ready for a concrete plant. But for an ag market, we hit our benchmarks really well so far. Still trying to tweak it to that perfect stage, but got a long way to go. As Lincoln said, so when I first came on with Arrowhead, with Rockwood, we looked at going into the gypsum world and trying to find the market. That was our first hurdle, and I'd love to say I'm just really good, but sometimes I just get really lucky, and I've called the right person, and he put me in contact with the right person that moves a lot of gypsum in the southeast, a lot into Georgia and the peanut country. Moves a lot of flue gas derived gypsum, and as Lincoln said, a lot of those coal-fired plants are beginning to shutter. And no matter which way of which side of the political fence you sit on when it comes to coal, that is the fact that we live in right now. So, and those plants probably will not come back because of the investment needed. So there's a demand for gypsum. And we quickly figured out, once we went through the process of getting that beneficial use, we had found a market that we weren't necessarily ready for the supply yet. So that's where we're at right now. We're always looking for new customers to bring in material to process that. As far as the process of the material, Lincoln went into a lot of that. It is simply removing the paper from that gypsum layer within. So we grind, we screen, and I wish I could say it's that easy all the time, but for us to be below 5% paper and above 90% purity, it takes a lot of tweaking and figuring it out, because sometimes you want your screen really small to get rid of all the paper, but then you lose half of your gypsum. Then if you get them too big, you end up with 10–15% paper in the product, and that's not good either. It doesn't offer benefit to farmers when they land apply. So finding that happy medium and finding how fast to process it, it takes some trial and error. Go ahead, Caleb. Next slide. Land application, as I said, is kind of where our market's at right now. Some of the benefits that farmers see, like I said before, we're not going to send anything out just to above ground landfill, so to speak. So when we put something on the soil, we want it to be beneficial and profitable. So the biggest thing is it is calcium sulfate. So it does provide macronutrients, calcium and sulfur, to mainly corn crops in Tennessee. So that's a big bonus to farmers. Most of them are applying it between 1 and 2 tons to the acre, either every year or every other year, alternating it with agricultural lime. The second benefit is soil compaction. So when you put that seed in the ground, it begins to germinate into a seedling. If you've got a crust on top of the soil, that plant has a hard time to bust out of the soil and get up to the sunlight. And that's equally as important as what's going on if there's soil compaction below, because those roots can't penetrate deep into the soil, can't find that additional water and moisture below the surface, and doesn't ground that plant firmly in a strong windstorm. if you've never seen a cornfield after a strong storm, when there's football field size swaths laid on the ground, it certainly isn't ideal to the farmer for sure. And lastly, the biggest benefit from an environmental side and from a surrounding area side is gypsum. Studies have shown that gypsum will reduce phosphorus runoff by 60%. So when a farmer applies phosphorus fertilizer onto the ground, the last thing he wants is it rain and that phosphorus to run off into the streams. And at the same time, from an environmental standpoint, that's not what we want either. So to be able to apply a product to hold those nutrients in the soil, make those readily available to the plants for a better yield, that's an ideal situation for everybody involved. So this product obviously has a ton of potential to help the farmers of Tennessee. As far as our future in future products, obviously we've got gypsum going on, and I won't spend any more time on the biochar than what Lincoln did. I think he did a really good job of explaining kind of what that looked like, and the possibility of composting. Obviously, we've got plenty of wood material. Arrowhead Ag would love to bring some of that over and begin some composting in the future to be able to offer some additional soil amendment products into the market. Caleb, I think I'm good. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you've got any questions. We'd love to talk to you.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Lincoln and Nick. I really appreciate all of the information and just the openness to talk about sort of the future and the regulations that go into land application. Really appreciate all the work that all three of you guys are doing. Now, I know, let's see, that I wanted to go ahead and after all three of our speakers did their presentation, I don't see any questions coming in right now, but feel free to send those in if you have questions for any of our speakers. I am going to bring us back to that final Mentimeter question to see if you learned anything. So if you've still got your Mentimeter pulled up on your phone, let's see here. Would love to get your input. So so as a result of this webinar, I want you to, same 4 subjects, let us know if you feel more knowledgeable about all of the following. So go through there, say how much you've learned, if you strongly agree or you still feel like you could have a little bit more information on some of them. We really appreciate, and this helps us sort of gauge if these webinars are working and teaching you guys a little something. Give everybody a couple minutes.
We've made a lot of experts here today, Caleb.
But these are higher numbers than we were seeing at the beginning, so that's exactly what we're looking for. So
we learned something.
All right, that's good. Give it about a couple more seconds, and then we will close out. All right. Okie dokie, let's see here. Not seeing any questions, but if you're eating dinner tonight and you're like, man, I wish I would have asked that question. All of our speakers had their contact information. If you didn't write those down, we'll make sure to share the slides with those. You can reach out to these guys and answer those questions, or feel free to email me, and then I can work on getting those answered for you. But really just wanted to say thank you to the speakers and also to everybody that registered for this, to be informed on the important topic of land application. Also wanted to thank, really just everybody that's working on this topic, all of our solid waste management, people in that division with the regulators there, everybody in Department of Ag that has anything to do with this. So there's a lot of things changing when it comes to land application, and a lot of opportunity. So if you have any questions about any of this kind of stuff, please reach out to us. I did want to mention that this webinar is being recorded, so I'm going to work on getting that converted and put onto our YouTube channel, and then also these presentation slides will be available on our website. But I will be sending a follow-up email out to everybody that registered and that will include the link to the recording, so you can rewatch it if you need to, or get any information off of it that you might not have taken notes on. But yeah, we're a minute over, so sorry for taking a minute or two of your time, but we appreciate the constant support of our pollution prevention program. And like I said before, if you need anything or have any ideas about future webinars, don't feel afraid to reach out to me. My email, you should receive a bunch of emails from me if you're on this, but my email is caleb.powell@tn.gov. Hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and I forgot to say, happy Valentine's Day.